What an event. How wonderful to see so many people here. Can everyone hear me? Sometimes I don't need a microphone because of my voice. Lisa and Ingrid, thank you so much for your work. Thank you for honoring me by inviting me to tell my story about my mother. And I want to begin, actually my presentation will be reading certain poems to you about my mother and weaving the backstories of those poems to you. So the first poem I'm going to read is very short. It's so short, I'm going to read it twice. But it's about mothers, initiation. There are birds that fly under the rim of the world, giving it a push. Only a woman in childbirth can hear their wings. There are birds that fly under the rim of the world, giving it a push. Only a woman in childbirth can hear their wings. And for me, it's a poem that talks about not only about the amazing possibilities of motherhood, but the challenges that mothers face. So with that, let's talk about my mom. I'm going to hear a lot about her. She passed in 2009. Excuse me, that was my dad. My mom passed in 2012 at the age of 93, and she was a challenge. She had an interesting backstory. She was the daughter of Polish immigrants that came from southern Poland, came from around Gdansk, and she was born in 1919, and keep in mind that year, it's very important, 1919. And she was born in Ohio, northern Ohio. As I said, both of her parents came from southern Poland, immigrated to the United States before World War I, so like around 1910, 1912. And she was the second youngest of 6 children in her family. Her parents came from Poland, settled in Cleveland, where my grandfather got work in the steel mills, and my grandmother worked as a chambermaid. They called them chambermaids back in the day, not, the housekeeping in a hotel. She was a chambermaid at a posh hotel in downtown Cleveland. My mother, because of the fact she came from a poor immigrant working class family, did not have access to higher education, even high school. She went to Jane Addams High School in Cleveland, named after the social activist Jane Addams from Chicago, and it was a trade school. It was an occupational school. So she, after 8th grade, when she went to Jane Addams High School, she didn't learn math or algebra or geometry. She learned how to make a bed, how to do laundry, how to change a diaper. So it was that, schooling that she had. And she also, one of her greatest pleasures was having internships around the city. She internship for a Jewish family once, taking care of their household and children. She loved that. And one thing also about her, she was an orphan very early on. I told you that her parents came from southern Poland, beautiful landscape south of Krakow in the mountains, the mountain villages, but they came for a better life, but they had a rough life, her parents did. Her father died when he was only 42 and she was 10, and 5 years later her mother died. And that was really formative for my mother and her siblings. She wouldn't talk about it, but it did inform her life. And she met my father when they were quite older, in the late 20s and in the 40s. If you were in your late 20s and not married, you were almost considered like a has-been, or an old maid, at least for the woman. So they met at a dance, neighborhood dance in Cleveland, and it was a whirlwind romance. They weren't, they didn't know each other that long before he popped a question. They got engaged and they got married a few months later. And long story short, they were like their late 20s when they got married. it was not a great marriage. Maybe they had this whirlwind romance at the beginning, but even when I was a little kid at 8, 9, or 10, there were cracks in the marriage that I'll talk about. So here's a poem about a family, my mom and dad, when they were first married. And you know, I'm in the picture too. Not born yet, but I'm in the picture. This is called Family Pose. This is my mother and my father standing close together just 1 year into their marriage. She hides behind him as she hides her first pregnancy. Her face peers over his shoulder. I'm hiding inside my mother, making her large, her body a chore to keep around. She is embarrassed. But both of them are laughing as if someone told a joke, and I am laughing too. The small sunken teeth hold the grin for the camera, hold the grin tight. You can see it in the negative there, the small white light that lives alone, that lives between the shadows of its dark parents. So that sets up a little bit about the family dynamic and the marriage and the dark parents. But a bit more about my mom. 2 things my mom loved: housework. Remember her high school years? Jane Addams, learning how to do laundry and cook. You know, that was her big thing. Housework and gossip. The worse, the better. And she loved Hollywood gossip. Before People Magazine and Us Weekly, there were such pulp, gossip magazines as Confidential, The Lowdown, Hush Hush, and Uncensored. That was my mother's literature. She loved that stuff. And so I talk about her love of housework. I talk about window wax. I don't know if you remember what that was. It was in a liquid in a metal container. It was either white or pink. You put it with a sponge on a window or a mirror, and it would you would harden up, then you would wipe it off, and the mirror and window look great. And then I talk about Prussian bluing. My mother could do laundry 5 times a day and love it. Prussian bluing was an additive you would put in the washing machine for white clothes. And it would turn the water blue, no lie, but miraculously, it made a white shirt whiter. All white clothes were whiter with Prussian bluing. And then I talk about movie stars, Ava Gardner, Greta Garbo, Joan Crawford, Jean Harlow. They're in this poem too. So this poem begins with a quote from Ava Gardner. And one time when she was on the road, a newspaper reporter said, "Describe your business. Describe show business. Describe what you do." And she said, quote, "It's the kissiest business in the world. You have to keep kissing people." Ava Gardner. And the title of this poem is called "A Kiss is Just a Kiss." My mother, in her own words, didn't know much, but what she knew, she knew. How to darn a sock's hole until its universe imploded into a white dwarf of string theories. How to polish window wax into a mirror until it reflected a gaze more intense than Snow White's stepmother. How to magically stir the cauldron of laundry to transform Prussian bluing into a pure white shirt. And then her encyclopedic knowledge of movie stars. She never called them actors or actresses, but stars, as in the heavens, the constellations, the Big Bang. Her lessons were taught by chain-smoking gossip columnists. She pored over their theses, illuminated in the pages of Confidential, The Lowdown, Hush Hush, and Uncensored. My mother could tell you how Jean Harlow really died. It wasn't kidney failure, but she was poisoned by all that peroxide she used on her hair. How Greta Garbo brushed her teeth. She never used she never used toothpaste, only salt. How Joan Crawford plucked her eyebrows. She didn't. Enough said. My mother loved the backstabbing of it, the kiss and tell of it, the guilty pleasure of it. And when she read this quote from Ingrid Bergman, a kiss is a lovely trick designed by nature to stop speech when words become superfluous, unquote. My mother, with her blue hands and absent husband, almost believed it. So, the absent husband, and keep in mind, remember I said the marriage wasn't great, but they never divorced. They never separated because they were devout Catholics. That was a no-no, but it was not a happy marriage. And there was never any physical abuse or sexual abuse, as some of the dear children we advocate for go through, but there was a lot of screaming, yelling, verbal abuse. My sister and I just have one younger sister. We witnessed it throughout our lives, and this was my mom. Her husband died. They were married for 60 years. Her husband, my father, died in 2009 when he was 89. She died a few years later at 93 in 2012. But in between that time, before my father died, she went into Alzheimer's disease. And she became a nicer person. Imagine that. Usually it's the reverse. But she was so bitter and mean-spirited most of my adult life. And then she got Alzheimer's. And she became almost fun to be around. Right, Tony? She had my husband, great sense of humor, wise things. One time I visited her at the nursing home. She says, you know what? I'm going to tell you the wisest thing. You know what? This is a dead-end life. Right here at the nursing home, where do I go after this but the grave? Wise in her Alzheimer's. So she became quite erudite, for only having an 8th grade academic education before she went to trade school to learn how to make a bed. So this is about my mother's dementia. I also talk about the movie stars. Olivia de Havilland is here, Clark Gable, Errol Flynn. But this is her in her dementia. So sometimes I speak in my mother's voice, sometimes I speak in my voice, and I think you'll get the picture. I enter my mother's dementia, and she lets me in, calls me Irene, her sister, and Marianne, her mother, or at times just Mom or Mama. Thank you for the flowers, Mom, my mother says to me, her daughter. And I don't fight the inevitable, her mistakes. Pearls melt in vinegar, she calmly states. I nod. Don't correct her like I did when she was young and coherent, bitter and mean, married to the wrong man. She proclaimed this phrase as if it was a movie title, and she, the unfortunate heroine in the starring role, like Olivia de Havilland, trapped in a private elevator, like Lady in a Cage played out in the Cleveland suburbs. My father was no Clark Gable, no Jimmy Stewart, not even Errol Flynn on a good day. The marriage, a big mistake. Another fake title from a borrowed movie. I find an old letter that she wrote in 1974, the year I married. Quote, okay, you better pay for that wedding dress yourself. I hate that dress, okay? Don't do nothing for you. Looks like a hostess gown. Hostess gown that a hostess would wear at a restaurant like the Brown Derby or that Italian place on the West Side. Okay, you pay for it all yourself. You should buy that nice dress at Ann's Vogue shop on Broadway with all the lace and all the ribbons. Okay, but no, you buy that ugly dress that don't do nothing for you. You will look like an ugly and skinny bride, okay? I don't know why he marries you. Your mom. I don't correct her grammar, spelling, or punctuation, but I keep the letter, a souvenir, a third-class relic from an erstwhile saint, St. Helen of the spotless bathroom, St. Helen of the worn rosary beads, St. Helen the housewife. Attention, attention, Mom, she says to me. Happy birthday, Merry Christmas, Happy Easter, Happy Anniversary, happy everything. Because they work it that way. They work it that way. As if every holiday for her had an agenda. I've heard the family rumors. My mother consulted gypsies who read tea leaves, made sure every dark stain of tea was invoked 3 times before she let her body conceive me on the night of her 30th birthday. When I was born, the moon was waxing gibbous, swollen, pregnant, humpbacked, silver disc, not quite fully illuminated. She tells me, "You don't know what nothing is. When I was your age, my father died. Never cried at his funeral neither. No time, no time. Then 5 years later, my mother died. Again, no tears. You know why? I didn't want to do nothing after that. Not even cry. What's the use? The dead can't hear it. But me, I heard my mother calling my name every day long after we buried her. Early in the morning before I woke, late in the evening before my dreams carried me across the night's river. Always the same voice from that dark place. Helen, Helen. Her voice so clear as if she was in the basement calling me down to help her fold clean white sheets. My mother's skin is flawless, pure alabaster, no scar, hardly a wrinkle, amazing for a woman orphaned at 15. Like pearls, I hear myself say in spite of myself. She loved them. I never did. That's one of the things that was wrong with my wedding dress, not enough pearls. I prefer amber, so much history to wear around my neck, my wrists, piercing the flesh of my earlobes. The ancients had it right. The Greeks knew amber was the only organic gemstone, seemed to hold light at its very core, so they called it electron, substance of the sun. The Vikings believed amber symbolized the tears of the goddess of love. The Chinese tell the story that when tigers die, their souls become amber. And in Poland, amber is known as gold of the sea. Poland, the wounded heart of Europe that created my mother and father in its tight embrace. I imagine a cluster of amber growing around a woman's neck as she listens to a polonaise, the music mixing with the slight breeze that touches the roses in the garden outside Chopin's house, outside of Warsaw, but the woman is not my mother. Vincent van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh, Vincent van Gogh. My mother mumbles to the wall. This woman who has never set foot in an art museum, emphatic about the Dutch painter being as omnipresent as her television. Later, I swear I hear the same phrase out of her mouth that has nothing to do with art and everything to do with TV news. Events and guns, she says. Events and guns, events and guns, into my quiet, almost closed ears. As I end my presentation, I want to talk about forgiveness and how I learned to forgive the mother who was so bitter and mean for most of my life, and then kind of mild-mannered and funny during her dementia. And I found out about that history of my mom, why she was orphaned at 15. And this is a bit of the story, then I'll go into the poem. But it was forgiveness that really opened the door for me in my relationship with my mom. And when I told you she was born in 1919, remember I said that was a very important year? Well, the year before my mother was born, in 1918, her parents buried 2 little girls. One girl was only 18 months old, died of the Spanish flu epidemic, which we all know about because we relived it with COVID. And months later, another daughter who was 7 years old died in a very tragic playground accident. It was after school, she was by herself. She was waiting for her father, my grandfather, to come home from work to take her to a meeting or an appointment. And she was by herself. She was playing on the playground at the school, and she climbed the tall steps to the slide, and she fell. And in those days, they didn't have tree bark or mulch or soft, anything soft. It was asphalt, and she fell. She broke her neck. She didn't die immediately, but they did, take her home, and there was nothing that the doctor could do for her. And I found out later, my grandfather was late, and she was there alone when this accident happened. When I heard about this, I told my mom, did you ever miss those 2 little girls who died before you were born? And she very emphatically said, you cannot miss what you never had. That never affected my life. But friends, it did affect her life, because her mother and father were just overwhelmed with grief and guilt and remorse and sorrow. And my grandfather died of a heart attack at 42 when my mother was 10. 5 years later, her mother died of a simple infection that went rampant in her system because there was no penicillin in the early 30s. So this is a poem that opens the door to that forgiveness that I learned. And it's based on a painting in the Grand Rapids Art Museum. It's in the permanent collection, and it's called Provincetown in Winter, 1918 by Garrett Benneker. All you need to know, it's a frozen harbor in winter with boats locked in the ice. That's all you need to know. But what got me into this poem was the year that the painting was painted, 1918, that tragic year. Contour of absence. Is this what the new world has given us? A place of broken ice, its center of negative space, devoid of real color, except for the dreamlike mauve, teal, and red of boats, locked and listing in their quiet sleep of winter. Halfway into the continent, in a place of factories, not boats, my mother is being conceived by her immigrant parents, not for love or passion or longing, but to erase the contour of absence, the silhouette of 2 daughters who died the previous year. By illness or accident, it makes no difference. The death of one child, the death of a child, releases one soul and enslaves all others. The mother forgets to brush her hair for weeks. The father can barely remember how to walk down his street. But how can my mother know this, starting the thin journey to her life? And how can the winter, with all its snow and ice, mask true sorrow when everything in this frozen universe hopes for spring? The 2 boats leaning into each other as if in unmarked graves, but the sky gray and calm, waiting to be born. I will end my presentation with 2 more short poems about me being a mother. I want to talk about my son and, of course, my daughter. And what I learned from my mother was how important it is to be supportive. Not so much that she modeled that for me, but I learned that from that absence in my life. So the most important thing for a child is to be supportive, unconditionally loved, nurtured, enthusiastically. So this is about my son. He was 3 years old when he drew this picture of a horse. It was in preschool, a horse under a sky. And just imagine the horse with hooves extended like Superman. And the mane is like a cape, flying behind him. So this is a horse under a sky for my son. You first paint the amber red mare the color of dark blood. You then invent a yellow sky and the short bursts of her breath reaching to the edge of the paper, which has no line of horizon. The horse seems to fly in this rectangular universe. Hooves extended, mere hint of brown wings. Steam rises from her back, and she waits, hopes for green hay, apples. The movement of your small hand on the page. Son, this is a picture of the world before you were born. One flying horse suspended under one yellow sky. No visible line of land to touch down on. No idea of direction, destination, of coming from or going to. Only solid space, blank and shining, totally yours. And the last piece, if I talk about my son, I must talk about my daughter. And this was written soon after my daughter was born. And I knew that and we were done, a son and a daughter. And so I knew this was the last of my birthing experiences. And this is about the possibility of what we give our children. And isn't that what's important? To give them their own history, the blankness of their page that they write on it, with our love and with our caring, empathy, support, nurturing. That's what it's all about. So this is called History of the Body for my daughter. Body within my body, I shape you out of almost nothing, give you a tight envelope to surround your soul. I deem you female, eyes, cobalt blue, fingers long and translucent without ever realizing it. And after the quantum leap from single cell to complex organism, much of your body's life is beyond my conscious thought. You're waking, you're sleeping, the small objects of your complete desire. Complete as the perfect wings of the jay above your head or the pale stars that mark your birth with nothing but pure light. Daughter, I cannot give you anything so complete or perfect or pure. But I can give you something better, your body, which is your life, and the fierce love of it that no one can take away. And these words that will remind you of that love, and your Father's broad hand that opened the door to it, and the blankness of the rest of this page for your own words, your own history.